Steven Seagal sat alone on a worn wooden bench at the edge of a quiet street. The city moved around him, cars passing, distant voices, the hum of everyday life, but he seemed untouched by it all. He wasn't dressed like someone important. No security. No flashy clothes. Just a dark jacket, relaxed posture, hands resting calmly on his knees. To most people, he looked like just another older man taking a break. That's when they noticed him. 4 men stood across the street near a corner store. Loud. Careless. Confident in the kind of way that comes from never being challenged. Their laughter cut through the air as one of them pointed toward the bench. "Look at this guy," one said, shaking his head. "Out here all alone." Another laughed. "Easy target." They crossed the street slowly, circling like they had done 100 times before. This wasn't new to them. This was routine. Steven felt their presence before they spoke. But he didn't move. One of them stopped directly in front of him, blocking the sidewalk. Another leaned against a lamppost. The others stood just close enough to feel threatening. "Hey, old man," the leader said. "This your spot now?" Steven looked up slowly. His eyes were calm, observant, unbothered. "I'm just resting," he replied quietly. That answer made them laugh even harder. "You hear that?" one thug mocked. "He thinks this is a park." A passerby glanced over, then quickly looked away. Nobody wanted trouble. Not here. The leader stepped closer, invading Steven's space. "You got money?" he asked. "Because this bench isn't free." Steven didn't raise his voice. "I don't want any problems," he said. That calmness irritated them. One of the men nudged Steven's shoulder lightly, not enough to hurt, just enough to test him. Steven didn't flinch. Something about that bothered them. Most people reacted. Most people showed fear. This man didn't. The leader narrowed his eyes. "You ignoring us?" Steven met his stare, steady and controlled. "No," he said. "I'm asking you to walk away." For a moment, the street felt unnaturally quiet. The thugs exchanged looks, amused but also confused. Who did this man think he was? What they didn't know, what nobody on that street knew yet, was that this calm wasn't weakness. It was restraint. And in just a few moments, they would understand exactly why. The laughter didn't stop. If anything, it grew louder. The leader smirked and took another step forward, standing so close that Steven could smell alcohol on his breath. The other men shifted positions without saying a word, slowly closing the space around the bench. It wasn't random. It was practiced. Steven Seagal noticed everything, the way one of them kept glancing down the street, the way another cracked his knuckles like he was warming up. Still, he stayed seated. "You got some nerve," the leader said, "telling us what to do." Steven kept his voice level. "I'm not telling you anything," he replied. "I'm asking." That calm answer only made things worse. One of the thugs laughed sharply. "Hear that? He's asking us." Another added, "Must think we're nice guys." A woman walking past slowed for half a second, sensed the tension, then crossed to the other side of the street. A man near the corner store pretended to be busy on his phone. Nobody stepped in. Everyone understood the unspoken rule of the street: don't get involved. The leader waved a hand dismissively. "Look, old man. This area. It's not safe. Accidents happen." Steven tilted his head slightly, studying him. "Then you should leave," he said. "Before one happens." That did it. The leader's smile vanished. "Is that a threat?" "No," Steven replied. "It's advice." The group reacted instantly. One of them kicked the leg of the bench, making it jolt. Another leaned down close to Steven's ear. "You don't get to talk like that around here," he whispered. For the first time, Steven stood up. Not quickly. Not aggressively. Just enough to show he wasn't intimidated. The height difference wasn't dramatic, but something changed the moment he rose to his feet. His posture was relaxed, yet grounded, like a man who had been in worse situations and survived them calmly. The leader scoffed. Oh, so now you want to stand? Steven looked at each of them in turn. I don't want trouble, he said again. But I won't be pushed. A car slowed nearby. Someone inside lifted their phone, pretending to check messages while secretly recording. Another phone appeared across the street. The atmosphere shifted, not enough to stop the thugs, but enough to make them aware they were being watched. The leader noticed. Recording us? He snapped at the crowd. Nobody answered. He turned back to Steven, irritation flashing across his face. You see this, he said. You're causing a scene. Steven shook his head slightly. You are. That answer landed harder than expected. For a split second, the leader hesitated. Then pride took over. He shoved Steven's chest, not full force, but enough to send a message. Steven took a single step back and stopped. No anger. No panic. Just control. The crowd collectively held its breath. Have you ever seen someone pushed just because they looked weak? Comment below where you're watching this from. The leader laughed nervously, trying to reclaim control. Yeah, that's what I thought, he said, though his voice lacked confidence now. But Steven didn't respond. He simply stood there, eyes locked on the man in front of him, not with rage, but with quiet certainty. And in that moment, everyone watching could feel it. This situation was no longer a joke, no longer routine. The thugs had crossed a line. They just didn't realize yet how badly they were about to regret it. The street felt different now. Not louder, not chaotic, just heavy. The kind of silence that presses against your ears and makes every movement feel amplified. Steven Seagal stood still in front of the bench, his feet planted firmly on the pavement. The shove had moved him back only an inch, but the meaning behind it had traveled much further. It wasn't about space anymore. It was about dominance. The leader noticed that Steven hadn't reacted the way most people did. No shouting, no threats, no fear. That bothered him. You deaf or something? The leader snapped. I said move. Steven didn't answer immediately. He glanced briefly at the street behind them, the slow traffic, the small gathering of onlookers pretending not to watch, the phone still quietly recording. Then he looked back at the man in front of him. I'm not in your way, he said calmly. You're in mine. That sentence landed like a challenge. One of the thugs scoffed. Man's got jokes now. Another stepped closer, reaching out and grabbing the front of Steven's jacket. His grip was tight, aggressive, meant to provoke a reaction. Look at me when I talk to you, the thug growled. Steven looked down at the hand gripping his jacket. Then slowly, deliberately, he lifted his eyes. The thug froze for a moment. There was nothing wild in Steven's stare. No rage. No ego. Just focus. The kind of focus that made people feel exposed. Let go, Steven said. The thug laughed, but his laugh was forced. Or what? Steven didn't answer. He didn't need to. The leader noticed the hesitation and stepped in, slapping his teammate's hand away from Steven's chest. Relax, he said, though his tone suggested anything but. I got this. He stepped closer again, chest puffed out. You think standing there all quiet makes you tough? Steven exhaled slowly. I think you're trying very hard to prove something, he replied. That did it. The leader's face twisted with anger. You don't get to analyze me, he snapped. You don't know me. I know enough, Steven said. You don't want this. The words were calm, but the meaning behind them sent a ripple through the group. One of the younger thugs shifted nervously. Man, let's just go, he muttered. This is getting weird. The leader shot him a glare. Shut up. He turned back to Steven, his voice louder now, drawing more attention. You think you scare us? Steven shook his head. No, he said. I think you're scaring yourselves. A murmur spread through the small crowd. Someone whispered, something's off about this guy. Another quietly pulled their friend back, sensing trouble. The leader clenched his fists. He hated that people were watching. Hated that control was slipping. Hated that this man refused to play his role. You want to be a hero, he sneered. Let's see how brave you are. He raised his hand, gesturing to the others. Two of them stepped forward instantly, positioning themselves on either side of Steven. The fourth hung back, eyes darting between faces, unsure. Steven noticed everything. The angle of their shoulders, the tension in their arms, the way the leader's weight shifted slightly forward. This wasn't his first time being surrounded. He adjusted his stance subtly, not enough for the crowd to notice, but enough to ground himself. "Last chance," Steven said quietly. "Walk away." The leader laughed loudly, overcompensating. "Or what? You gonna lecture us to death?" He stepped back half a step, raising his voice so everyone could hear. "Watch this," he said to the crowd. "This guy thinks he's special." The moment stretched. Nobody breathed. Then the leader lunged forward, swinging his arm, fast, reckless, fueled by ego rather than skill. Time seemed to slow. Steven saw the movement before it fully happened. His body responded instinctively, without panic, without rush. But he didn't strike back yet. At the last second, he shifted just enough for the punch to graze past him, the force carrying the leader slightly off balance. Steven caught the man's wrist briefly, not to hurt him, not to end it, just enough to let him know. The leader stumbled back, eyes wide. The street erupted in gasps. "What the—" one thug muttered. Steven released the wrist and stepped back again, palms open, de-escalating. "I don't want to hurt you," he said clearly. "Don't make me." For a moment, fear flickered across the leader's face. Then pride crushed it. His jaw tightened. His face burned with humiliation. "You think that scares me?" he yelled. He motioned to the others again. "Get him." And in that moment, as the crowd recoiled, as phones kept recording, as tension reached its breaking point, everyone watching realized the same thing. This was no longer a misunderstanding. It was a mistake. And the consequences were about to arrive. The leader's command hung in the air. "Get him." For a split second, nothing happened. Not because the thugs didn't want to move, but because hesitation crept in. What they had just seen didn't match the story they had told themselves. This man wasn't scared. He wasn't scrambling. He wasn't reacting like a victim. He was waiting. Steven Seagal didn't raise his fists. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He simply shifted his weight, subtle, deliberate, grounding himself as the first attacker rushed forward. The move was sloppy, anger-driven, predictable. Steven stepped slightly to the side, guiding the man's momentum past him. His hand moved quickly but calmly, gripping the attacker's arm and twisting just enough to unbalance him. The thug stumbled, crashing to one knee with a shocked grunt. The crowd gasped. Before anyone could process what had happened, the second thug charged from Steven's left, swinging wildly. Steven raised his forearm, deflecting the strike and stepping inside the attacker's space. A short, controlled movement followed, not flashy, not brutal, just efficient. The attacker dropped backward, scrambling away on his hands. Everything happened in seconds. No flying kicks. No chaos. Just control. The leader froze. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Steven stepped back immediately, hands open again, creating space. He wasn't chasing anyone. He wasn't pressing advantage. He was making a statement without saying a word. "Enough," he said calmly. The word carried weight. The third thug hesitated, eyes darting between his fallen friends and the man standing in front of them. Fear crept into his expression, raw and unmistakable. The leader tried to laugh it off, but his voice cracked. "You got lucky," he snapped. "That's all." Steven didn't respond. He didn't need to. The two men on the ground were already backing away, pain and confusion written across their faces. They hadn't expected resistance, certainly not like this. Bystanders leaned forward now, no longer pretending not to watch. Phones were fully raised. Whispers rippled through the crowd. "Did you see that? He barely touched them. That wasn't normal." The leader felt it, the shift. The power he thought he had was slipping through his fingers. He clenched his jaw and stepped forward again, but this time his confidence was forced. His shoulders were tense. His breathing uneven. "You think this makes you tough?" he barked. "You don't know who you're messing with." Steven met his eyes. "I know exactly who I'm dealing with," he said. "Someone who's about to make a bad choice." The leader swung again, faster this time, fueled by desperation rather than arrogance. Steven moved. The motion was almost invisible to the untrained eye. He slipped inside the swing, guiding the arm downward while stepping across the leader's stance. With a controlled shift of his hips and a firm grip, he redirected the momentum. The leader lost his footing completely, slamming onto the pavement with a sharp cry. The sound echoed down the street. Silence followed. The leader lay there, stunned, staring up at the sky as if trying to understand how he ended up on the ground. His friend stood frozen, unsure whether to help him or back away. Steven stepped back again. Always back. He looked down at the man on the ground, not with anger, but with disappointment. "This didn't have to happen," he said. The leader scrambled to his feet, backing away now, fear flashing openly across his face. His tough image had shattered in front of everyone. "You're crazy," he muttered. "You're not normal." Steven nodded slightly. "No," he said. "I'm disciplined." Sirens sounded faintly in the distance. Someone in the crowd murmured, "Cops are coming." The thugs exchanged panicked looks. The leader took another step back, then another, his pride completely replaced by survival instinct. "Let's go," one of them whispered urgently. Steven didn't block their path, didn't taunt them, didn't pursue them. He simply stood there, calm as ever, watching as the men who had surrounded him moments earlier now retreated, shaken, embarrassed, and exposed. The crowd erupted in quiet disbelief. That was when people truly understood. This wasn't a fight. It was a lesson. And it wasn't over yet. The street no longer felt hostile. It felt exposed. The men who had once moved with loud confidence now hovered near the edge of the sidewalk, unsure of where to place their feet or their eyes. Their shoulders were tense. Their breaths uneven. They had come looking for an easy target, and instead, they were standing in front of a reality they couldn't control. Steven remained exactly where he was. Relaxed. Balanced. Unmoved. He didn't chase them. Didn't step forward. Didn't raise his voice. That restraint confused them more than violence ever could. One of the thugs glanced at the phones pointed in their direction and muttered under his breath, "Man, this is bad." The leader wiped his palms against his jeans, trying to hide the shake in his hands. His chest still rose and fell quickly, but the anger was gone now, replaced by something he hadn't felt in a long time. Fear. "You think this is over?" he snapped weakly, trying to salvage some dignity. "You think you won something?" Steven looked at him steadily. "This isn't about winning," he said. "It's about stopping." The leader scoffed, but the sound lacked conviction. "Stopping what?" Steven gestured calmly to the street around them. "This," he said. "You walking around believing you own people." The words hit harder than any strike. The crowd leaned in slightly, drawn by the shift in tone. This wasn't a confrontation anymore. It was a reckoning. "You don't know us," the leader said defensively. "You don't know what we've been through." Steven nodded once. "You're right," he said. "I don't. And that still doesn't give you the right to hurt others." One of the younger thugs looked down at the ground, jaw tight. Another swallowed hard, his earlier bravado completely gone. Sirens were louder now. Closer. The leader's eyes flicked down the street, then back to Steven. Panic crept into his voice. "You happy now?" he muttered. "You made your point." Steven shook his head slightly. "No," he replied. "You made it." That silence afterward was different. Not tense. Not explosive. Heavy. People in the crowd exchanged glances. Some nodded quietly. Others whispered in disbelief. This guy didn't even try to hurt them. He could have. But he didn't. The leader clenched his jaw, struggling between pride and self-preservation. "You think you're better than us?" he asked. Steven's answer came without hesitation. "No," he said. "I think I'm responsible for myself." That's it. That was when it finally broke. The leader let out a shaky breath and took a full step back, not tactically this time, but instinctively. His authority was gone. Stripped away in front of strangers. In front of cameras. In front of his own crew. "Let's just go," one of them said quietly. The leader hesitated, then nodded. They began to retreat, slow at first, then quicker, not running, but not standing tall either. Every step away felt like surrender. Steven didn't watch them with satisfaction. He watched them with concern. As they reached the edge of the street, he spoke again, not loudly, but clearly enough for everyone to hear. "You still have a choice," he said. "What you do next matters." The leader paused for half a second. He didn't turn around. Then the sirens cut through the moment, sharp and unavoidable. Police vehicles appeared at the end of the block. The thugs exchanged frantic looks. One cursed under his breath. Another raised his hands instinctively. Bystanders stepped back, making room. Steven remained still. When officers approached, their attention went immediately to the shaken group, then to the phones, then to Steven. "What happened here?" one officer asked. Before anyone else could speak, Steven answered calmly. "They were leaving," he said. "Let them explain." That choice, to step back instead of stepping forward, surprised everyone. The thugs were detained without resistance. The leader avoided eye contact entirely, his earlier confidence a distant memory. As officers gathered statements, people began talking openly now. "That guy could have destroyed them. But he didn't. That's real strength." Steven returned to the bench and sat down. Not like a victor. Like a man who had finished exactly what needed to be done. Nothing more, nothing less. And as the crowd slowly dispersed, one thing was clear to everyone who witnessed it. The real power wasn't in how fast he moved, or how strong he was. It was in how little he needed to prove. The flashing red and blue lights painted the street in sharp, unnatural colors. Conversations died instantly. Phones stayed raised. 2 patrol cars rolled to a stop, doors opening with practiced urgency. Officers stepped out, hands resting near their belts, eyes scanning the scene, the shaken men, the watching crowd, the calm figure seated on the bench. "All right," one officer said firmly. "Everyone stay where you are." The thugs stiffened. One raised his hands immediately. Another tried to explain himself all at once, his words tumbling over each other. "It wasn't like that. He attacked us. We were just talking." The officer raised a hand. "One at a time." Steven remained seated, his posture unchanged. He wasn't hiding. He wasn't asserting himself. He simply waited. Another officer approached him. "Sir, are you hurt?" Steven shook his head. "No," he replied. "I'm fine." The officer studied him for a moment. The calm demeanor, the steady eyes, the way he didn't look rattled at all. Something about him felt familiar. Meanwhile, the leader of the group stood a few feet away, his jaw clenched, eyes darting between the officers and the growing crowd. The adrenaline had drained from his body, leaving behind a cold, sinking realization. This was no longer a street moment. This was evidence. Phones were everywhere now. People weren't pretending anymore. They were openly recording, whispering, replaying clips. "Did you see how fast he moved? He barely touched them. That was clean." One officer turned to the crowd. "Anyone here witness what happened?" Hands went up. Several people spoke at once. Calm explanations. Consistent stories. The same pattern repeated again and again. Harassment, intimidation, escalation. The leader's face grew pale. An officer approached him. "You're being detained while we sort this out." "What?" he snapped, panic creeping into his voice. "For what?" "For starting an altercation," the officer replied. "And for refusing to disengage." The leader opened his mouth to protest, then stopped. Because someone behind him whispered something that cut deeper than any handcuffs ever could. "That's Steven Seagal." The words were quiet, almost casual, but they spread like fire. Heads turned. Eyes widened. Phones zoomed in. Another bystander said it louder. "That's Steven Seagal. The actor. The martial artist." The leader froze. Slowly, painfully, he turned his head toward the bench. Toward the man he had shoved, mocked, tried to dominate. Steven Seagal sat there calmly, looking no different than he had before, except now, the context had changed everything. "No," the leader muttered under his breath. Recognition hit him like a wave. All the pieces fell into place at once. The balance. The restraint. The effortless control. This wasn't luck. This wasn't a fluke. It was experience. The officer near Steven glanced at his partner. "You said Steven Seagal?" Steven stood up slowly. "Yes," he said simply. The officer's tone shifted immediately. Respectful. Professional. "Sir, we didn't realize." Steven raised a hand gently. "That doesn't matter," he said. "Treat this like any other situation." That response only made the moment heavier. The leader swallowed hard, his throat dry. The humiliation burned hotter than fear now. He avoided eye contact completely, staring at the pavement as officers placed him in handcuffs. His crew followed, silent, defeated. One of them shook his head slowly. "Man, we messed up." The crowd murmured, reactions overlapping. They had no idea. He didn't even use his name. That's real discipline. An officer asked Steven if he wanted to press charges. Steven considered the question for a moment. "I want accountability," he said. "Not revenge." The officers nodded. As the thugs were led toward the patrol cars, the leader finally looked back one last time. His eyes met Steven's, not with anger, not with hatred, but with regret. Pure and unmistakable. The doors shut. The sirens faded. And just like that, the street began to breathe again. People slowly lowered their phones. Some approached Steven cautiously, thanking him, shaking their heads in disbelief. Steven listened politely, then returned to the bench. Not to celebrate. Not to pose. Just to sit. Because the moment wasn't about fame. Or power. It was about what happens when arrogance collides with restraint. And for the men who walked away in handcuffs, that lesson would last far longer than any bruise ever could. By the next morning, the video was everywhere. What started as a tense street encounter had transformed into millions of screens lighting up across the world. Clips were shared, paused, replayed, not because of violence, but because of how little violence there was. People didn't talk about punches. They talked about restraint. They talked about composure. Headlines didn't exaggerate the moment, they highlighted it. Man harassed on street responds with discipline, not rage. Calm strength shuts down street intimidation. Power without ego catches internet's attention. And at the center of it all was the same calm figure. Steven Seagal. Comment sections exploded. This is what real strength looks like. He could have destroyed them, but chose not to. Respect is louder than violence. People from different countries shared the clip with captions about self-control, about dignity, about walking away without surrendering yourself. The thugs' faces, once full of arrogance, were now frozen in time, expressions of disbelief and regret that followed them online. Their actions had consequences, not just legally, but socially. Employers saw it. Families saw it. Communities saw it. The street that had once been quiet and forgotten became a symbol. News outlets tried to get interviews. Commentators tried to spin narratives. Steven declined them all. When asked later why he didn't respond publicly, he gave a simple answer. There was nothing more to say. That answer resonated even more than the footage. Meanwhile, discussion spread far beyond the incident itself. Teachers showed the clip in classrooms while talking about conflict resolution. Coaches used it as an example of discipline. Parents shared it with their kids as a lesson in self-respect. The message was clear and universal. You don't need to be loud to be powerful. You don't need to dominate to be strong. As for the men involved, they faced the reality of their choices. Court dates. Community service. Mandatory programs aimed at addressing aggressive behavior. For the first time, there were no shortcuts. No intimidation. No bravado to hide behind. And perhaps the hardest part for them wasn't the punishment. It was the memory. The memory of realizing, too late, that they had mistaken calm for weakness. That they had underestimated a man who didn't need to prove himself. Back on that same street, days later, the bench remained. People passed it without knowing its story. Some sat there briefly, checking their phones or catching their breath, unaware that it had once been the center of something much larger than itself. Steven never returned. He didn't need to. The lesson had already been left behind. Not carved into stone. Not written on signs. But carried forward by everyone who watched, shared, and understood what they had seen. Strength without ego. Confidence without cruelty. Power without abuse. And in a world that often rewards the loudest voice in the room, that message mattered more than ever. Final message to the audience. Never judge someone by how quiet they are. Never mistake restraint for weakness. And never forget, real power shows itself when it doesn't have to. If you believe respect is stronger than fear, type respect in the comments and subscribe for more powerful fictional stories like this one.